These African leaders are known for their straightforwardness, especially when addressing tough issues. In this video, we're highlighting moments when they didn't hold back during their speeches, tackling difficult topics head-on and delivering powerful messages. Get ready for some bold statements that demand attention. Patrick Lumumba. Patrick Lumumba addresses the motivations behind seeking political leadership in Africa, highlighting a concerning trend. Many aspire to lead primarily for wealth rather than service. He notes that, in many African countries, political leadership is often seen as the quickest way to attain riches, with little regard for the hard work typically associated with success. Lumumba contrasts this situation with Tanzania, where he acknowledges President John Pombe Magufuli as a positive exception. He suggests that, in most African nations, leaders prioritize personal gain over genuine public service. This pursuit of wealth, he argues, leads to a lack of qualified candidates in leadership roles, as the best and brightest are deterred from entering politics. He also points out that the electorate in Africa often expects financial incentives to vote, perpetuating a cycle of corruption and unethical practices. Lumumba emphasizes that until issues such as ethnicity and corruption are addressed, Africa will struggle to cultivate effective leadership. He calls for a change in mindset among both leaders and voters, advocating for a focus on integrity and service over personal enrichment.
Some of you may be aspiring to positions of leadership in the political arena, but the question is, why do you want to lead? In Africa, the shortest route to ill-gotten wealth is political leadership. If you want to get wealth without working for it at all, join African politics. That is the truth everywhere in Africa except for very few places. The only place that stands out now in that regard is Tanzania with President John Pombe Magufuli. The rest in Africa, I do not know. Excuse me, I'm a visitor. They hunt and gather buildings and cars and money. And that is why African leadership does not attract our best men and women. And African electorate also responds to money. I do not know whether it happens here in Africa, in Ghana. The African electorate also expects to be bribed so that they can vote. And until the day we are able to exercise the ghost of ethnicity, among other things, and the ghost of corruption in Africa, Africa will never get good leaders.
Chimamanda Adichie. Chimamanda Adichie shares a personal experience to illustrate the complexities of addressing tyranny and injustice in society. She recalls criticizing the Catholic Church in Nigeria for its materialism, hoping to encourage church leaders to reflect on their practices. However, this criticism led to backlash from some church leaders, including a priest who publicly attacked her during her mother's funeral, a time of deep grief for her family. Adichie highlights the silence surrounding this injustice, where many advised her to keep quiet for the sake of peace. She emphasizes that such an approach is harmful, as it allows mediocrity and injustice to become the norm. True peace cannot thrive without confronting and addressing the underlying issues of injustice. Adichie warns that if society continues to ignore injustices in pursuit of superficial peace, future generations will inherit a bleak legacy. She advocates for a culture of transparency and accountability, urging individuals and institutions to confront their shortcomings and advocate for justice.
In this context of a more nuanced understanding of tyranny, please permit me to tell you a personal story. About 2 years ago, I gave a press interview in which I said that the Catholic Church in Nigeria had become too much about money. Any honest-minded person knows this is true. It is flagrantly, self-evidently true in so many churches all over this country. And the point of calling this out is so that church leaders might curtail this unchristian practice, which is driving people away from attending services. Anyway, this criticism of mine appeared to upset quite a few church leaders, not all of them, because I think it is important to note that there are a few notable church leaders who are able to acknowledge the truth in constructive criticism. But it takes just one leader who is unable to take criticism to taint the perception one has of all leaders. Some months after I gave that interview, my mother died very unexpectedly. And this not long after my father had also died unexpectedly. In fact, I had by this time forgotten about that interview. But the priest in my hometown, a man called Christopher Eze, had not. And so at my mother's funeral, while my siblings and I sat in the front pew, our minds still in disbelief and our hearts broken with grief, this priest began to crudely and verbally attack me for daring to criticize the church. Later, his bishop, his superior, who apparently was also upset that I had dared to criticize the church for being materialistic, supported this priest. I spoke privately to a number of Catholics I respected about this incident, the sort of people who speak out boldly about government corruption. And I was struck by how quick all of them were to tell me, don't talk publicly about this, don't go public. A friend, who is no longer a friend, who is also very outwardly religious, told me that he would take me so that we could go and beg the bishop, so that the bishop would reprimand the priest, but quietly, behind closed doors, hush, 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 for the sake of peace. But I was not asking for peace. I was asking for justice. I wanted the bishop to do the right thing, to take responsibility, to reprimand the priest in the same public way that the priest had desecrated my mother's funeral, to set a precedence for consequences, and therefore make sure that no other priest would turn what is often one of the saddest days of a person's life into a venue for settling petty scores. Anyway, that did not happen. I can tell you that as I stand here, I am still filled with a shimmering, glowering, unending rage. But why did I choose to tell you this story? Because it made me realize how often in this country we sweep aside injustice in the name of peace. But it is always a fragile and hollow peace. Because as long as we refuse to untangle the knots of injustice, real peace cannot thrive. And so in the name of peace, we say things like, Okay, just leave it. Okay, it's enough now. Okay, it was very bad, but you should just stop talking about it. Okay, just manage it now, we don't do. And by saying these, we continue to make mediocrity our norm. We fail to hold leaders accountable, and we turn we fail to hold leaders accountable, and we turn what should be transparent systems into ugly, opaque cults. My experience also made me begin to think that there is something dead in us, something dead in our society, a death of self-awareness, a death of self-reflection, a death of compassion, a death of intellectual curiosity, a death of the ability for self-criticism. And I think it is time for a collective resurrection, so to speak. We cannot refuse to practice self-criticism and yet criticize the government. We cannot ignore the abuses by our religious, our traditional, our community leaders, and focus only on the abuses of political leaders. We cannot want to hide our own institutional failures while demanding transparency from government institutions. The first question we must ask is, what is the right thing to do?
Ibrahim Traoré. Ibrahim Traoré addresses the current challenges faced by Burkina Faso and highlights the broader context of imperialism, neocolonialism, and the ongoing conflict in the region. He argues that the violence seen today is a manifestation of these historical injustices. Traoré emphasizes the plight of young people who work in harsh conditions, particularly in artisanal mining, which he compares to labor in Europe and America during the 1800s. To address this, he announces the creation of a new company aimed at modernizing mining practices, allowing young people to work in safer and more respectful conditions. Traoré stresses that combating terrorism requires more than just military action. It also demands economic development. He believes that without job opportunities, young people may turn to easier ways to make money, which can lead to terrorism. Traoré urges local economic operators to invest in creating enterprises within Burkina Faso, asserting that it is unacceptable to import products that can be produced locally, like tomato paste. He encourages a collective effort to build a self-sufficient economy, appealing to the people to focus on local production rather than seeking opportunities abroad. He emphasizes that the struggle in Burkina Faso is part of a larger fight for all of Africa, calling for unity and action to create a brighter future at home.
Nous célébrons donc cette journée dans un contexte un peu particulier, comme les prédécesseurs l'ont signifié, ce contexte de conflit. Ce conflit que nous qualifions que autre chose que la manifestation violente, barbare de l'impérialisme, du néocolonialisme, de l'esclavage qu'on tend à nous imposer aujourd'hui. Ce que nous avons qualifié terrorisme. C'est dans ce sens que lorsque nous prenons par exemple le volet de l'orpaillage, votre thème en dit long sur l'employabilité des jeunes en milieu rural, beaucoup de nos jeunes se retrouvent aujourd'hui sur les sites artisanaux de production, dans des conditions les plus pénibles. C'est peut-être ce qui s'est passé en Europe ou en Amérique dans les années 1800, lorsque les hommes rentrent eux-mêmes dans des galeries, qu'ils creusent eux-mêmes pour sortir le minerai. Nos jeunes continuent de vivre cela, au péril de leur vie. Nous essayons aujourd'hui de moderniser un peu. C'est à l'issue de ça que nous avons créé donc la SONASP, une société qui va se permettre de pouvoir exploiter et de commercialiser nos substances précieuses, notamment l'or. L'or que les jeunes exploitent, que d'autres personnes viennent acheter à vil prix et qui contribuent à nourrir le terrorisme qui sort du pays sans que nous n'ayons aucun contrôle, nous avons décidé de créer cette société pour essayer de reprendre le contrôle de nos sites miniers et pouvoir permettre aux jeunes qui y sont de produire de façon plus mécanisée et plus respectable. Parce que cette lutte que nous avons aujourd'hui contre le terrorisme ne se fait pas uniquement par les armes, mais également par le développement. Tant que la jeunesse n'aura pas d'emploi, elle sera toujours tentée d'aller vers là où c'est facile d'avoir de l'argent. Et c'est ça aussi qu'il faut combattre. C'est le lieu pour moi de rendre hommage donc à tous ces jeunes qui se sont engagés sans état d'âme, comme VDP, qui sont aujourd'hui sur le terrain, sous la pluie, sous la brume, dans la boue, partout où on les demande de partir. Ils se battent sur le terrain pour essayer de récupérer nos terres et donner donc à ce pays ce qu'on appelle l'intégrité territoriale. Et chacun à son niveau doit donc pouvoir aussi, à défaut de prendre la Kalachnikov, prendre autre chose pour participer au développement de cette patrie. Et ça, nous ne comptons que sur vous les jeunes. Je disais tout de suite donc aux parrains et à la marraine que j'allais forcer la main à ces grands opérateurs économiques du pays, et je pense que certains sont là. Donc apprêtez-vous, on va vous forcer la main pour créer des initiatives donc pour les jeunes. Nous avons donc lancé l'APEC dans ce sens-là pour permettre de créer ce qu'on appelle nos entreprises que nous voulons mettre sur place. Parce que nous le disons, c'est inconcevable que nous puissions ici produire de la tomate et que nous importons de la pâte de tomate. C'est absurde que nous avons tous les produits oléagineux ici et que nous ne puissions pas les transformer. Nous avons lancé cela et je vous invite à souscrire massivement parce que nous allons créer nos entreprises ici sur place et développer. Certes, des esprits impérialistes pourront essayer de vous détourner de l'objectif, mais écoutez, visez loin, visez très loin, réfléchissez et voyez ce qu'on va faire. Parce que le combat que nous menons, ce n'est pas uniquement pour le Burkina Faso, mais c'est un combat pour toute l'Afrique. Il est temps qu'on se réveille et que nous ne soyons plus amenés à traverser l'océan, à mourir pour aller chercher l'Eldorado tant vanté. On peut le créer ici. Mettez-vous au travail et je pense que c'est possible.
Let us know in the comment section what you think of the video. That wraps up the video for today, guys. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to Insight TV, leave a thumbs up, and of course share the video. Until the next time, see you in the next video.